Nah. I'm saying it's like a trope with game review content. Like, the creator just can't reckon with the fact that he doesn't have any adequate reason to cover a certain game other than, I don't know, clout, lack of imagination, so they invent some kind of character that forces them to play a game, and then they're like, oh no, not that game, anything but that game, referring to this notorious game that everybody knows is probably, like, bad or something. Maybe they see it on a desk and put spooky music behind it, and then they cut back to their face, looking horrified. Might also make a good still to include in the thumbnail. I like to think I've avoided most of these pitfalls in my lifespan. Isn't that right, robot dog that I talk to sometimes?
Affirmative.
Jesus, nothing. Just nothing to play. Literally no games. Not a one in here. Fucking ghost town, for real. For real. I mean, I've been meaning to get around to this, and I'm doing it of my own free will, mind you. Hello.
Play Mystic Knights, or I will shoot you with the
I'm so sorry. I thought I emailed you. I changed my mind about the premise. Thank you for your time, though.
I will never forgive you for what you
Dreams, but not a dream. It's writing. If not
Mystic Knights is a third-person survival horror ancient vampire parasite clone bioweapon, I think maybe game. It was developed by Nlog Software and published by SCE Korea for the PlayStation 2 in 2005. There's very little information available about this game, but my assumption is that this was meant to be officially translated and published worldwide, but due to its poor sales and critic response, those plans were cancelled, so it remains only available in Korea. I could barely dig up anything about the developer. On top of there being a language barrier, there isn't much of a paper trail, and it seems like they must have merged or changed names a few times in a short period. I believe they began as kidandkid.com, a website with a number of children's games that did well enough for them, following the success of a platformer based on a popular animated film at the time, whose name I won't attempt to pronounce, but it has something to do with a white dog. They attempted to immediately begin work on a sequel to it, but a legal dispute over the IP rights got in the way of that, and the series continued without them. Following a sequence of searches I don't remember, I stumbled upon some kind of internal PowerPoint used by them, I guess to show to potential investors. Within, it says that they took on the name Nlog, or New Leader of Games, in the year 2000. They make vague reference to their platformer game, but I'm guessing since they no longer own it, they don't name it, which I had initially assumed was because it was something shameful and degenerate. The first game using the new name was an MMO arcade edutainment game called Bubble Shooter, a game that is impossible to find due to the oversaturation of bubble-based mobile games and having reached the limits of my interest in finding it after a cursory Google search came up with nothing. What I do notice is that the character used in its art looks a little familiar, but hey, I'll never tell. In this presentation, there is a section devoted to Mystic Knights, displaying some concept art and screenshots, much of which were not featured in the final product or were changed substantially. What it does illuminate, however, is how Mystic Knights was pitched, how they hedged their bets on a defining feature, and it is of course the one I have no way of showing or discussing with you. Aside from being a rather straightforward survival horror game in the vein of Resident Evil or Silent Hill, Mystic Knights sought to differentiate itself with its multiplayer component, a different kind of game unto itself that would unknowingly tap into a genre that would rise in popularity over a decade later, wherein several players would traverse a dungeon crawling with enemies and they'd work together to defeat them. The twist, one of them is an imposter, a monster wearing human skin that attempts to kill off the other players without drawing attention to themselves, adding a hint of social deduction to survival horror. Following Mystic Knights, they made a pivot to online games, inspired by the success of microtransaction-heavy games like MapleStory. Their first foray into that sort of thing was or Bots of Unlimited Transformation, an MMO about robots fighting computer viruses, which was planned to be released for Xbox Live in 2004, but it would miss that deadline by a few years and wind up on a much less prestigious platform. After the American game publisher Acclaim went under in 2004, it was briefly resurrected by an ex-executive who revived it as a free-to-play platform for MMOs and other games that utilized online multiplayer gameplay called Acclaim Games. This quickly went under due to game developers not receiving adequate pay and there being a persistent issue with cheating, something they tried to remedy with invasive anti-cheat software that people had trouble removing from their PCs. Anyway, Bout, which was renamed Bots, also with 2 exclamation points, was handed over to Acclaim Games in late 2006, making it their responsibility to deal with the upkeep. And despite complaints about its premium currency allowing players to buy items and upgrades that gave them a severe advantage over players that did not opt in, it wound up being one of the most popular games there. That is until 2010 when Acclaim Games was bought out by Playdom, which was subsequently swallowed into the gaping maw of Disney. Anything after this point becomes blurry. At some point they briefly had an MMO RTS called Darkness and Light that was shut down and all but erased from the internet following some kind of legal battle with a publisher, and oh my god, I don't give a fuck. So I get that none of that was interesting and none of it deals with things I would normally ever talk about, but I lay out to ask the question, what business did these people have making a survival horror game? Because Mystic Knights is a bizarre anomaly that I wound up pursuing because I hadn't heard or seen a single thing about it. And I know every game, except for whole genres that don't interest me, which there are numerous. I figured I had survival horror down though. But here this thing is, like it just slipped through the cracks in reality, staring me in the face, taunting me, calling me a son of a bitch, a goddamn fucker. It just missed the peak of the PS2's survival horror domination and was released right as home console ownership in South Korea was becoming increasingly rare and replaced by home PCs. Too little too late and hardly given a shot to subsist outside the womb. For years it existed as video game space junk, a neat piece of debris floating in the spaces between. Thankfully someone found it interesting enough to translate it for the sake of preservation and to perhaps expose others to this strange artifact from another world, a world full of exhausted pop stars and films that relish in tonal whiplash, expelled by a studio that had never made anything close to a survival horror game and was left so dejected by the experience they decided to, by my definitions, never make a real game ever again. I tend to think of Resident Evil as like the Rosetta Stone of survival horror. I know there were predecessors that it likely drew from, but to me, there's a big enough leap between it and, say, Alone in the Dark, where I'm fine sidestepping it. Fuck it, I'll rewrite history. Mystic Knights presents a much different tone and doesn't entirely tackle any of the themes that Resident Evil would slowly expand on. Imperialism, capitalism, baffling one-liners. This is a story about a group of civilians with mysterious backgrounds that are forced to survive together amidst a sci-fi disaster, attempting to foster more human drama instead of relatively straightforward horror with a side of commentary to it. I don't think it does that very successfully, but I can see it doing that. I guess it does make slightly more of an attempt to humanize its cast than Resident Evil, but I'm referring to the original one though, which I should make clear was made a decade prior to this game, and I honestly still would say it's better in every way, but it included more of that. So I mean, I guess that's still a dub. Mystic Knights opens with a brief cutscene where our protagonist, Bruce McKellen, that's his name, receives a letter from his old friend Alan, but his words suggest there was some bad blood between the two, and he becomes more interested when he makes mention of someone named Monica. Alan and Bruce used to work together at something called the MISR, the Military Institute of Strategic Research, a shadowy government organization that probably isn't working on some kind of benign thing. I don't even know what that would be. I was gonna say like a nice pen, but like Like a really nice pen. Something happened that made Bruce leave, and now Alan's offering him a job at a new facility, attaching to the letter a photo of a whale that has seemingly been chomped to death by something larger than it. He takes the bait and heads right on over to this ominous-looking seaside fortress, in part intrigued by the fate of the whale, but clearly more concerned with seeing this Monica again. Bruce enters the front door into an elevator that is immediately rocked by an explosion, and it plummets to the bottom, spitting him out into a sterile, metallic labyrinth of labs and offices, full of bizarre machinery and blood-spattered medical instruments. Clearly some kind of disaster occurred down here, and he's soon confronted by strange biomechanical monsters. There isn't a ton of internal monologue or anything giving insight to Bruce's thoughts, so the full extent of his reaction to this situation is his expression upon seeing them for the first time. He quickly adjusts and becomes a killing machine, taking out dozens of these things, despite his background presumably being one of science. I mean, using anime logic, I know he doesn't look like your average lab guy, but deep beneath that physique and flawless hair, I know what he is. He's a little nerd boy, he's a little Fortnite gamer. Still ignorant to how deep this maze descends, Bruce eventually stumbles on a woman named Jennifer, passed out on the floor. He momentarily becomes confused, thinking she was Monica, but stifles that. Unfortunately, she isn't much use in shedding light on what's going on. She lost her memory and doesn't have any idea what's going on here, or where here is even, or why here was allowed to make this an appropriate uniform. I bet if you ask the dude that drew this why those are there, he has that reason ready to go. I mean, you gotta have your bases covered. No. See, that's like a tactical nipple. If any of yous gets in a pinch, you can just press them both at the same time, and you'll parachute whoosh, flies out your back, scoots you right into HR's office. Assuming she must be shaken up or injured, Bruce instructs Jennifer to stay put while he scouts the rest of this floor. As we shoot and slice our way through rapidly respawning creatures, we find vague diary entries and inter-office communications that hint at what caused all of this. Experiments with cell regeneration, engineered cells that can be introduced to a human body where they will multiply at will, in theory making the host immortal. Some make the shocking observation that this may have adverse effects on human DNA, which is a chill way of saying it will turn you into a table with a prehensile tongue. Bruce clears the way for Jennifer to hole up in a stairwell that seems safe, and there they meet two new characters, an MISR security guard named Jane Blair and a scientist named Dr. John Nielsen. They had also been wandering around the building thinking themselves the sole survivors of the disaster. From their perspective, they were working like normal at a lower clearance, and following an explosion and power loss, everyone seemed to disappear, replaced by monsters. The explosion triggered an emergency quarantine, locking all exits save for a tunnel at the lowest basement level. The plot seems to follow this format, this repetitive cycle where you move survivors to a new location, have a moment where we plan out the next step, Bruce takes it upon himself to explore the surrounding area, unlocking doors, booting up power generators, and killing monsters, until he reaches the next safe area to transfer the survivors. There is, however, this somewhat dissonant JRPG logic where other characters will do things that, in reality, you would have noticed, but since they aren't represented on the screen other than when they're in the safe house, it makes it seem like they just teleport places for absurd illogical reasons. This first happens when Bruce sees some more survivors being attacked on, I guess, the only working monitor in this building, and he rushes off to go help them, but as soon as he steps foot outside the safe house, Jane calls him on the watch phone she gave him earlier, screaming for help. But like, what trouble could she have gotten into in the 2 seconds I've been on the other side of the door? Oh, she's not even in there anymore. She's in a room ahead of me. You just have to set aside the spatial reasoning of how I could be in the same room with Jane, step outside, and she's already being attacked by monsters in a room ahead of me? Like, what, did she shove me out of the way to run into a mob of nurses. However this happened, it results in Jane being mortally wounded and requiring some kind of experimental stimulant to survive. While trying to hunt it down, we find more hints at what these mad scientists were up to. And in keeping with just about every survival horror game set in a lab, it is, you guessed it, something to do with a failed super soldier program. The weird thing is, while I was still rolling my eyes at this development, they dropped another wrinkle that is infinitely more interesting, but even more vague and less important. They've apparently discovered a new kind of metal that they of course use to make a fantasy axe you'd find in some kind of mall gift shop. We also learn about something called Project Ancient, where something is implanted into humans, but all testing for this found that the implant was rejected. To remedy this, clones were produced that did not reject the implant. I do appreciate the abundance of notes and diary entries to find amongst the exposition. Just little news articles or epitaphs, you know.
It's coming. I can hear it right outside the door.
DoorDash.
Ooh, yay. Hey, wait a second, you're not. Because without those, there isn't much in the way of storytelling. Dialogue is pretty minimal, and there isn't any environmental storytelling either because everything looks the goddamn same. I mean, I guess we could break here for spoilers if you want to seek out and experience this game and its plot for yourself. This seems like a random spot because there aren't many well-defined story beats. It's one of those games where stuff just kind of happens in a linear sequence and you just gotta deal with it, I guess. Bruce gets Jane her stimulant, and it looks like she's gonna pull through, and later finally tracks down the survivors he saw on the monitor. Thus, we add researchers Kelly, Henry, and Frank to our ranks. This is the first scene where they use a term that will be repeated throughout the game that is maybe a translation error, or maybe just a strange, creative choice. But when Bruce asks one of them what they were running from, this guy says, "Didn't you see the vampire?" So, look, I'm trying to like this game. I'm trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. I see them making moves. I see them doing stuff. And I want to think that there is some deeper reasoning for how muddled it's been. Why I simply can't keep track of what the point of anything here is. But hearing the researchers that work here call the monsters we've been fighting this whole time vampires was disorienting to say the least. Bruce logically says, "Huh? Those monsters?" And he confirms, "Yes, they're vampires." Well, actually, Kelly interjects, "They're mutants, the result of human experimentation," to which Bruce, unchanged in his understanding, thinks, turning human beings into monsters. But when I talk to Kelly again, she fucking tells me those monsters are vampires. So can you pick a fucking lane, Kelly? Talking to Frank reveals that he had planned to retire tomorrow and live a peaceful life, which I think most people consuming media immediately read as, "Hello, I will be the first to die." This scene is also where I learned the importance of talking to every character and exhausting all their dialogue options until they loop. If you talk to Henry, the first thing out of his mouth is, "Kelly knows more than I do. She's the head researcher's assistant," which I took to mean, "I don't have much info for you, talk to Kelly." But if you talk to him a few more times, he gives you the key for the next area. So you could be stuck wandering back and forth trying to find the key because this guy didn't immediately elect to proffer it up to the one guy willing to clear a path to safety. After a few more location transfers, Bruce and the growing group of survivors find an emergency shelter room to take refuge in. Everyone's a little banged up. Jane is still injured, and now 2 others are showing symptoms of some kind of illness. Combined with a report that suggests the vampires infect humans by vampire larvae, tracking their heat signature and imperceptibly entering them, it doesn't bode well for the gang. The scientists here have developed a chemical that would make this process easier for the larva, a gas called prism, that they either unintentionally or intentionally released on their own, likely causing nearly everyone here to become monsters. Jane calls Bruce back to the sanctuary because Frank has died mysteriously. Murdered, perhaps. Because everyone was asleep at the time, they don't know who to blame for it except for Kelly, who was the one that found the body. In the next area, a vampire larva emerges from an air vent and attacks the group, but Bruce kills it. Henry explains that these must have been implanted in humans, altering their DNA and turning them all into tables or motorcycles. And likely just covering her ass, Kelly throws out, "Hey, now that you mention it, I think I seen one of these things by Frank's body. Yeah, that's it. This must have been what killed him." So even if that was true, I'd imagine you'd want to notify the rest of the survivors if a giant alien bug was in the room. Just something to consider for later, Kelly. While looking for a suitable place to transfer them once again, Bruce is attacked by a new evolution of the vampires, but is saved by two more characters. Guard Captain Michael Isaac and the very guy that led to Bruce coming here at all, Alan. Despite seeming pleased to see Bruce, you can tell there is some animosity between the two. One of the first things Bruce thinks to grill him about is Monica, the woman mentioned in the letter, but he says that she isn't in the lab. But she did leave him a note. In it, she expresses regret for some kind of wrong she and Alan committed and says that she misses him. We then get one of a few expository flashbacks. We see Bruce, Monica, and Alan having fun with science together at science school, maybe. The three were friends, but it was clear that Bruce and Monica had a special, more intimate bond. And you know this was a long time ago because it was back in sepia tone times. Alan helps Bruce restore power to this level, but when they reach the next safe area, Bruce collapses into another expository memory. In this one, Alan presents the results of a study and is lauded for it, garnering fame and success. A study that he stole from Bruce's thesis. As if that wasn't bad enough, Monica then grew distant with him and started giving her affection to Alan. He implies that he had every opportunity to expose Alan for the fraud he was, but he didn't because it would indirectly hurt Monica. She was all that mattered to him, so he just grit his teeth and pretended nothing was wrong. And you went to their wedding? Bruce! That's exactly what I would have done. Just be a passive-aggressive bitch the whole time. When Bruce wakes up, Michael is dead, found in much the same state that Frank was. Alan reveals that he knows a lot more about the vampires than he initially let on, suggesting that one of them may be infected. The vampire larvae can embed themselves in someone's spine, and after 30 minutes there is no visible sign of infection, but the host will begin to act erratically and even become violent. There is, thankfully, a detector, a device that can scan them for vampire infection. Bruce asks Alan to watch over the survivors and heads off to find the detector, coming across a letter that expands on the vampires' origins. 25 years ago, this lab was a military radar station that discovered a network of ruins beneath this spot. Within them, they found a creature they dubbed Ancient. It's this creature's DNA that was used in the bioweapon projects. Alan expands on this, bringing up the picture of the whale he sent Bruce, a guinea pig for a large bioweapon they developed called Kaiser, created from the larva they discovered while working on Project Ancient. On top of being just a big fucking monster guy, its DNA has proved capable of curing most human diseases. But as the creature continued to grow, they lost control of it. Alan wants to control it and use it to benefit the world, but everyone else's priority is just to leave. At the detector, everyone gets scanned and then waits for the results. There is some attempt at the Thing-like paranoid atmosphere, where everyone is suspicious of the other and nervously trying to appear as non-infected as possible. But it's a concept that sorta resolves itself within this one scene. The results come in and it looks pretty definitive that Henry has been infected by the vampire larva, which he does not take well, not even willing to humor the idea of finding a cure. And guilt-ridden for unknowingly killing two of the other survivors, he produces a gun from somewhere and shoots himself. Morale is low among the survivors, but nobody else is infected, so they press on towards the exit. Some more documents suggest that Kaiser may have been telepathically linked to the Ancient, explaining why it began to disobey them and become aggressive. After this discovery, the Ministry of Defense decreed that Project Ancient be shut down. But since they were having trouble figuring out a way to kill it, they pretty much just sealed it away and continued to poke at it in secret. Deeper into the labs, the sterile halls begin to become more bioorganic. I'm not too sure why these lower levels look like this. Could have something to do with these areas being powered by the larva, I guess they figured out that certain strains of them could be used like a powerful battery, and now they've just become assimilated with every surface in this place. And once again, a character has teleported ahead of you, blindly wandering into danger. Jennifer is locked into a room full of monsters, and Bruce has to shoot down these living doors to get to her. After rescuing her, she says she was hoping a walk would jog my memory. She hasn't really been relevant in a while, so I totally forgot that her whole thing was she had amnesia, and maybe that's still affecting her because she seems to forget that they are in a demon lab crawling with vampires and that she's an unarmed dum-dum. Alan catches up to you to inform you that both Jennifer and Kelly went missing, so Kelly is still unaccounted for, and Bruce runs off to track her down, but instead finds Monica floating in some kind of chemical tube. He's understandably furious with Alan that he allowed her to be a part of their experiments. Alan justifies this by claiming that Monica was terminally ill when they all met, and even when they married, she was not long for this world. He stole Bruce's research in order to find a cure and save her. Alan began treating her with the vampire DNA, which did succeed in prolonging her life, but eventually the disease progressed too far, so he took more drastic measures, injecting her with a larva. With almost comedic timing, he assures Bruce that she's alive and well, come take a look. Go on and say hi, Monica. Tell him you're okay. Monica. Okay, I swear, that's never happened before. This creature makes a dive for Bruce, but Jane jumps in its path, sacrificing herself to protect him. After Bruce defeats the transformed vampire Monica, there is a surprisingly touching scene where she reverts back to her human form for a moment, and they share some words. She's glad they got to see each other one last time. Before dying, she says, "Bruce, don't ever forget me," which is a weird and heavy thing to put on someone actively grieving your death. But okay, go off, dead queen. Don't ever forget me. Live with this trauma forever. Wow, it's so sad. I mean, after all this... Oh, well, back to it, I guess. How about we take 5, right? We can take a 5? Get a little... Dixie cup full of water.
Oh, that was easy. I'll press start.
After they get separated for a while, everyone meets up again to find that Dr. Nielsen is dead. So once again, one of them may be infected. And again, someone immediately blames Kelly for being found next to the body. This time it's Alan. At this point, I'm not sure how exactly we're meant to feel about Alan. Some of this I'm just guessing while trying to parse through its translation, but I think we're supposed to be unsure of his motives. On one hand, he has somewhat been humanized after revealing his reasoning for stealing Bruce's thesis, for stealing Bruce's thesis, and for testing the vampire DNA on Monica. But he also doesn't seem all that shaken up when she dies in Bruce's arms. On top of that, he expresses a general coldness to everyone around him, detached from the severity of it all. Also, some notes suggest that the true reason for Monica's testing was to implant her with the ability to control Kaiser, but that for whatever reason the transplant would only successfully take if the host was void of emotion and had an inhuman tolerance for pain, something they seem to easily correct by creating a clone. As suspicious as Kelly may be, if you remember back to when we first met Jennifer, Bruce was momentarily convinced that she was Monica. So I don't know, it could be something. The now drastically cut down group of survivors make their way to the penultimate basement level of the lab. Kelly becomes frustrated that Alan seems to just remember important details about what goes on here, showing that he's been playing dumb for much of their time together. He reveals some of the cruel, unethical things that went down on level B7, experiments using not just corpses but the living, prisoners and transients. After listening to his explanation, Kelly once again runs off on her own. This time we just sort of find her dead with little fanfare. Time's passage in this game feels so odd. Like she just ran off, and we walk to this room and she's already like weeks dead. Reading her diary, we learn that she was not really an employee. She was a reporter investigating some of the facility's disappearing staff. With only 2 survivors left, the options as to who the killer have become binary. But this is also where the plot decides to become near incomprehensible to me, in part because of the wonky sci-fi logic, and of course due to the well done but still slightly suspicious translation. Yeah, actually, I'm sure it's fine. I'm just like, that can't really be what's happening most of the time. This can't be the words you meant to write here, right? So if I understood this correctly, which I don't, I simply cannot, in an attempt to control Kaiser, ancient vampire DNA was given to Alan, but since the original ancient carried both male and female genes, you'd need a male and female human with ancient vampire DNA working in tandem by fusing together somehow to control the Kaiser. I guess it's kind of like the way you need to control a Jaeger. I guess they figured out how to do this, but for reasons not explained, women don't take well to this process and become sporadic and violent, which is, I mean, okay, alright, let's write that then, sure, whatever. All this to say that Jennifer is Alan's female ancient vampire counterpart, thus making her the killer this whole time, but unknowingly to some degree. I guess Jennifer made herself forget about this to protect her humanity, but upon remembering that she's a female Alan, the 2 of them turn into orbs and explode. There's a lot suggesting that Jennifer is a clone of Monica, but I don't think they definitively state that, and if Alan says she is his counterpart, would that not make her some kind of female clone based on his DNA? But Bruce does comment on how much she looks like Monica, but Monica is also blonde and Jennifer's not. Her hair looks more like Alan's. Also, wouldn't Alan need to be a clone as well? Or is it just enough that he's kind of a sociopath aside from his affinity for Monica? But what about elsewhere, in a boss arena, a vampirically transformed Alan and Jennifer fight each other, and Bruce is given the option to help one of them. If you choose to help Jennifer defeat Alan, this is unfortunately the darker path to go down, because Jennifer is like feral now, and she just turns her wrath on you, forcing you to kill both of them and then face Kaiser alone. If you help Alan defeat Jennifer, he's still mortally wounded, but in his last moments, he gives Bruce an experimental cell division device called Tomcat that would weaken Kaiser and make it vulnerable. I guess now that the person he was trying to save is dead already, he has lost interest in establishing cures for all known diseases. Even in death, Alan can't help but villainously stroke his chin. No, Alan, don't die! I bet you'd like that, wouldn't you? So predictable. Bruce is able to defeat the bioweapon, which triggers more explosions in the Institute as he makes his escape. While being picked up by the military, Bruce says he'll never forget this mystic night, which is probably the most confounding title drop I can think of. That is far from the phrase I'd use to describe what we just went through. I guess he could be in shock, because this is tantamount to him saying, wow, so that was kind of wild, right? You know what I mean? This guy gets it. This guy gets it. This guy knows what I'm fucking talking about over here. There's a lot working against my basic understanding of this game's plot, but if I've absorbed enough of it correctly, I think there's a spark of a neat idea here. It's just suffocated under the weight of mediocre choices and a disinterest in explaining itself, offering this drip feed of expository documents that are usually less than a paragraph and occasionally contradict each other or just repeat themselves. I can't get a good read on its intention, but a lot of it comes off so perfunctory, as though the game already existed as it does, just with no text, and then someone was brought in to try and transplant a plot into it. And I just feel like it doesn't strive for anything. It doesn't aspire to be much else than another game in a recognizable genre. The thing that I think works is the emotional core to it. The fractured friendship between Bruce Allen and Monica. The love triangle and the stolen research. That's the human part that I understand. I've lived enough to empathize with feeling betrayed by someone you once thought a friend, or missing out on an opportunity to have something more with another person, holding on to that sorrow for an unhealthy span of time. I could have done with that being something more prevalent within the moment-to-moment plot, and maybe that could mirror things happening within the struggle for survival scenario, add more of a psychological element into the mix. But the amount of content actually devoted to it is small. Much of what actually happens in this game is characters yell each other's names at each other as they get picked off one by one.
제니퍼,
브루스.
블루스, 알렌, 제니퍼, 켈리가, 제니퍼, 켈리, 알렌, 켈리, 헨리,
브루스.
켈리,
브루스.
제니퍼, 켈리,
브루스. 아이삭.
알렌, 모니카가, 모니카, 알렌, 모니카는
Most of the other themes and plot points here are a bunch of bland sci-fi ideas smeared onto a palette until it's become beige and unremarkable. There's cloning, bioweapons, gene manipulation, super soldier programs, and none of that is presented or repackaged in all that unique a form. It's only in recounting it do I realize how repetitive it is, how many times it just does the same thing over again and expects you to care. You think I actually remember these assholes' names? No, I only know because I'm looking at the footage right now. How could I forget such great pseudo-American names as Vicky Kitten, Buster Mac, Dwayne Doige, Bernie Corbin, and Vince Vaughn? On a base level, I like the premise of this game. Guy gets a letter from an estranged friend to visit a clandestine research institute. Upon entering it, you are trapped inside and faced with the results of illegal genetic experiments, and he also has to confront this part of his past that's burdened him. That's a solid framework on which to do something interesting. It's just that they never really got around to that part. There was one brief shining moment where I thought the game was going to establish this theme of paranoia, where you're constantly doubting the survivors' motives, with one of them hiding their dangerous infection, and there would be a bunch of infighting between them, leading to violence and chaos and darkness and devastation. But then that resolves itself as soon as it's brought up. However, there are a ton of games that I think still manage to linger in my mind because of some feat of atmosphere or clever subversion of a trope, but I wouldn't say this does much of that either. There is something to a labyrinthine web of grimy labs, abandoned, left bloodied and partially consumed by alien flesh, but I also don't feel like a substantial effort was made to make the game eerie or unsettling or even to differentiate any part of this place from another part of it. I've now been stuck here 2 hours trying to think of a complimentary note to go out on, so for the sake of my own well-being, I'm just going to head out. Gonna walk to the store. You want anything? What flavor? Mixed together, really? You sly devil. Sounds weird, but your funeral. Alright. Be right back. Mystic Knights has observed other video games. It's watched them from afar, binoculars in hand, taking mental note of how they operate, and it's done its darndest to render what it's witnessed onto a disc. If you've played an early survival horror game, you should have some idea of how they tend to operate. Limited supplies, sparse puzzles, usually of the item-based variety, tense if a little awkward combat, and tank controls. I don't have a thesis written on how accurate that is. These are just the things that come to mind when I think about what I would like in my survival horror game. I want to feel worried for my safety, but not helpless. I have a chance if I conserve resources and choose my fights wisely. I would say that Mystic Knights achieves one of those requirements, in that you will come across one or two item-based puzzles. Actually, if I could just back up to the first moment you are handed control of Bruce, the controls are off-putting, because you do sort of follow tank control logic, but you also can't control him using the D-pad. In fact, the D-pad is functionally useless. I think it only ever had a function in the multiplayer component and was used to emote things. But in the main game, it is useless, and you control Bruce with the left analog stick, while you control the camera with the right, though its range of movement is limited. The thing that makes this weird is that even without fixed camera angles and things that some found antiquated about other survival horror games, it still feels janky and grants you less mobility and control than those. Even though you could move the camera around with you, it has this odd quirk where it tries to help you out when you turn a corner by automatically taking control of your camera and moving it around so you're looking straight ahead again. I guess it is considerate, but it's mostly disorienting that you have complete control of it, and then suddenly the camera has decided to do its own thing, like an extreme form of Joy-Con drift. When you aim your weapon, it seems to lock into these set directions, as though you were using the D-pad, but you can't use the D-pad. You also can't aim up or down. You're either pointing at the thing in front of you or you're not, and sometimes that slim cone of damage feels hard to determine. This led to a lot of wasted ammo as I tried to find the way I could position myself to hit an enemy. Frustrating as this was, don't worry about wasting ammo because you're going to get a lot of it. Healing items as well. Enemies almost always drop something, and they also respawn pretty quickly, so nearly every room with enemies in it can provide a generous spread of supplies if you just keep leaving and returning. Oh, also there is no reload button, so you have to reload in the middle of combat, and you cannot move while this animation is happening. The only saving grace there is that if you're hit while reloading, it usually just accepts that you reloaded. You also need to kill enemies so your weapons gain experience. I don't really know how that's justified in lore, but killing enemies gives your equipped weapon XP, and eventually it will level up, becoming stronger, and every 3 or so levels it will upgrade to a new version of the weapon, complete with a makeover. It's bizarre. You literally just use a gun enough times that it evolves into a different gun. I think they may have actually tried to explain this with a document you find about a new kind of metal that was discovered, like maybe I'm assigning something interesting to this completely dumb bullshit mechanic, when that's all it is, but I think the guns might be some kind of living metal that actually grows and changes with use, like a gun Pokemon, which I'm surprised they haven't done yet. They did a refrigerator and a keyring before they thought about gun. If you upgrade the sword enough times, it looks like it develops an eyeball or something, so I mean, maybe this is interesting. That's how I feel about most of this game. Maybe it's interesting. This was something I had to work out on my own, because I don't have a manual for this game. Maybe someone has scanned it, but then it would still be in Korean and I'd have to use a janky app to read it. I couldn't find any walkthroughs posted that would explain the basics of how you should be playing Mystic Knights. So if you decide to play this out of morbid curiosity, there is a point around the first boss where I think it's just universally understood that you should probably do something really tedious and laborious for a good 3, maybe 4 hours. Not watching a DCU film, but grinding. Just get it out of the way in one go, because if you face the first boss after putting in a normal human amount of effort, all your weapons will only take the faintest sliver of health from him, and you'll probably wind up like I did, exhausting my once infinite seeming supply of bullets, barely dropping him to half health, dying simply because there was nothing else I could throw at him. So yeah, just take a few hours killing the same groups of enemies over and over again, at least until you have the third evolution of your pistol and sword. I thought I was going insane trying to figure out how to get through this area. Like I had stumbled upon some gamer conspiracy, an elaborate cover-up to prevent me from finishing it, as every playthrough I could find of this area uniformly edited their gameplay in such a way that they reach this point, and then there's suddenly an edit where they, without explanation, have completely different weaponry that makes short work of the boss. There was no explanation for it in the description or the comments. What are they trying to hide? Why are they afraid to answer a few questions? Eventually, I accidentally evolved my sword and put together that the weapons change at higher levels, and the edit must have been them cutting out grinding, because that would have been boring to watch. It's also very boring to play. It's really odd how you only ever find yourself starved for items and stuck with cheap weapons when you try to avoid enemies and play it safe, but the game is actually much easier if you just kill everything every time you come across it. Needless to say, this kind of fucks with the whole philosophy of survival horror, as you're not really struggling to survive. You have an infinite font of ammo and medkits, so much so that by the time I finished the game, I had never even used my stack of 30 plus large medkits. I would just use the small ones that drop frequently. There isn't really any skill required for combat. Most enemies are complete bullet sponges that you'll need to empty a full mag into before they go down. Some of them have an attack pattern that is difficult to avoid, and you may get locked into some kind of animation that lasts a little too long, where you get your ass kicked, but there isn't much danger in that when I can just heal myself with my endless stack of medkits. Because there isn't much to combat aside from shooting or swinging in the same combo, no dodging or strict timing to any of it, it created this annoying combination with also just being able to heal yourself endlessly, inducing this strange fatalist frustration in me. I kept getting to this place where I just let myself get near death. It's like, what does it fucking matter? They're just gonna keep hitting me over and over as I make the same grunt. Just why even let it go on? Why do I continue to play their game? And then at the last possible minute, I'd relent. Well, I guess if I made it this far, it's not my time yet, and I'll just heal myself. It's kind of like that part in True Detective Season 2 where that dude just turns the lights out on his motorcycle so he can feel something. That's how this Korean video game for the PlayStation 2 made me feel. The only times I died were because I had sort of zoned out and didn't notice I was dying. I have no advice on how to better enjoy the boss fights where they just stand still while you pump lead into them. So there's very little about the gameplay that works for me. Everything that could count for a win has something that diminishes it in some way. It's got a really well done Metroidvania-esque map that you can even turn on while playing, which is really neat and helpful, but the game doesn't often reward you for exploring. So really I just use it so I don't have to memorize the maze-like floors of the Institute. I do like the idea of your weapons getting progressively more badass looking, but to get there you have to lose sight of reality, move beyond realms, leave your body and let it act out this monotonous routine while sparing your sanity. For a moment I thought there was going to be some substantial additional content to explore after I finished the game, because you can play it as different characters, but I think this literally just replaces your character model and the game then plays out identically. Meaning even though I chose Jane's character model, I still sound like Bruce and everyone calls me Bruce. They do add the ability to transform into a monster mode that upgrades like your weapons, but you know, I didn't need it the first time around and I don't think there will be a second time around. There is plenty in Mystic Knights that looks era appropriate. I imagine if you saw contextless screenshots of this game, it would look like a legit, maybe a Final Fantasy spin-off or something, but a proper game. This looks like a game you could walk into your local game dispensary and purchase for several gold coins. I remember little of the customs of the outside world. Perhaps one could barter for it, exchange a pocket watch or some bauble bearing the king's emblem. I think what reveals this game's limitations and reveals how hollow it can be is just seeing any part of it in motion. It's hard to ignore how lazy the environmental design is, consisting of one or two metal hallway textures just tiled into infinity. Maybe that will be interrupted by a warning sign or something, but it all blurs together. This happens to an almost comedic effect when they reuse tiles that have a sort of unique surface that you'd think would only exist on one wall, like one that has "I don't want to die" scrawled in blood. But you find several identical walls just like it, as if even in death they just couldn't find an original bone in their body. Inside the lab rooms you'll find recycled machinery or readouts, all of which you cannot interact with or look at. They are just static obstacles there to make a room feel less empty, which somehow makes them feel cosmically barren. I do like what they're going for with creature design. It's got a very clear Giger-esque aesthetic. It's biological, it's sexual and mechanical as well, which doesn't make the slightest bit of sense considering they are supposed to be vampires. I mean, I do have to hand it to them. It is pretty original to put a flesh motorcycle in a game and call it a vampire. That in this world, a man could be minding his own business, a giant mosquito monster flies up to him, embeds itself in his spine, painlessly and imperceptibly, and then at some point he becomes a motorcycle. There isn't much of a variety to them. At a certain point, they do that thing a lot of older games did where they denote that an enemy is stronger by changing its color. I do find the ones that remain folded up on the ceiling until you walk past them creepy in concept, but I think more enemies should be based on vehicles and furniture. Let's just put some wheels on it, why not? The other NPCs are not bad. They're detailed and designed in such a way that reminds me of how I draw characters in my youth. Just badass and tactical entirely for form and not function. During cutscenes, each character gets a portrait image while they're talking, which would have made this game really easy to localize elsewhere. That's probably why it's so playable, even fan translated. Most of the text in the environment is also already in English and also not important or relevant to anything. So the main system was broke. Alright, let's hope they fix it. Everything except for the names of the areas you enter is English. That might have been helpful, to be honest. Oh look, I'm in the... Larva Zero Beep. There is nothing about Alan or Jane's design that makes any kind of sense as a uniform or even just casual lab wear. I gotta admit, I was worried when early on Jane was attacked and suddenly her portrait art changed to this. I was like, uh-oh, what have I started playing here? Is this a game I gotta finish off camera? But it was substantially less horny following that. I don't know what the deal with that was on second thought because they don't even commit to that chest damage. When her outfit is torn, on her actual character model, they just gave her outfit like a cleavage window and not the claw marks, as though it were designed that way. But then when you meet up with her later, it has just redesigned itself into the first iteration. I mean, is this interesting? I don't really have any issue with the UI or map. It's not great, but it taps into a design sense that I hold a lot of nostalgia for. I have this secret love for chunky item models spinning around endlessly. I don't know what it is, but it's good. I like when things go spin. As far as the sound department, there was one game that came to mind a lot while playing this. I kept detecting notes of deadly premonition, in that I also wouldn't be surprised if this game's sound design was just outsourced to someone with access to some kind of royalty-free sound library. There's a lot of sounds that are just a bit too familiar, and when they're not, they just sound bad. Like every sound effect is just not the sound it should be, but what was available. And because enemies are so bullet absorbent, you're gonna hear a lot of just a lot of that. And it was hard for me not to fixate on the fact that the shooting animation and sound sometimes didn't quite sync up. Or maybe it's just that the game didn't account for you shooting so quickly and you'd have a few shots that just don't get a sound. The music seems to have two modes, one of which I like and the other I don't. The one I do like is clearly taking inspiration from the Silent Hill games and by extension Twin Peaks. It's a little jazzy, a little spooky in that loungy, mysterious kind of way. And every now and then it will dig deeper into that well and become more ambient and make a legitimate attempt at being unsettling. It's a shame that it hasn't been ripped and posted anywhere yet because it's not bad at all. The other soundtrack mode belongs to the tracks used during cutscenes or boss fights that are more reminiscent of pretty generic RPG soundtracks. It seems like placeholder, exciting fantasy music.wave. Like somewhere on the internet, it is available and named exactly that. There's just such a duality to everything in Mystic Knights. I've been in my liking games arc for so long that the moment I have negative thoughts, I fight them. So now I gotta either focus on the good or just embrace my dark arc. You know what I mean? Nah, I'll try to be strictly complimentary from here on out. And I wouldn't really know how to criticize the voice acting because I have no frame of reference for Korean. So for all I know, the voice acting could be goofy and over the top, but I'd have no idea. The only thing I can really comment on is that it sounds like they're emoting a lot. They got passion for sure, so much so that it peaks the mic on occasion.
대답해! 거짓말을 하고 있는 거야! 아니야! 말해 어서! 그럴 리가 없어!
Oh no, the dark arc has begun. Welcome to the twisted darkness inside my mind. Are you ready, gamers? I went into Mystic Knights assuming it wouldn't be spectacular, but willing to have my expectations subverted. They were not. However, I'm glad I got to experience this game. It's always neat finding an artifact from an era whence I enjoyed many formative gaming experiences. I don't know why I wrote that way. The simple novelty of its existence will have to stand in place for a compelling narrative, memorable characters, satisfying gameplay, or creative game design. I can see some distant vision of an interesting game here, and its monsters, its bleak tone, and the feeling of a descent, diving deeper and deeper into the depravity of mankind's experimentation with an unruly power. But a month from now, I know that the only memory that will stick with me is standing in a hallway that looks like every other hallway in the game, rhythmically swinging my sword to kill a motorcycle so my sword will grow. Honestly, in looking back, I think if this game had come out in the US right on time, 2005, the same year as two of my favorite games, I doubt I would have been all that interested in it. Maybe in part because it was billed as a survival horror game, but if I had seen some screenshots or some gameplay, I'd pretty quickly put together that this does not meet the elusive and hypocritical requirement for what I'd call a good game. It's the sad possibility of my fascination with games that have been abandoned. Games with dead owners or just deadbeat owners. There is always that cold possibility that they were left homeless for a reason, that it was just a problem child with a soulless look in its eyes. It just doesn't try for anything. It doesn't take a swing. It kept reminding me of another game I made a video on called Ring Terror's Realm, which is not a good game by any stretch of the imagination. But after playing this, I feel like Terror's Realm took a swing. It tried to do a thing, and boy, it failed miserably, either due to incompetence or just lack of time and resources. And I respect that failure more so than a game that just wants to meet some minimum requirement of game and be shuffled among other better games, like a vampire imposter. In that video, I say something to the extent of, the Ring knows what it's copying well enough to behave like a competent survival horror game. It understands the base elements that should be there. It just wasn't particularly good at holding them together, even with the help of a popular IP to play with. Mystic Knights fails similarly, but less spectacularly. Any enjoyment you could get out of Terror's Realm would be from the way it goes dumb in a big way. It feels like you're playing a disaster of some kind. But Mystic Knights manages to both fail and remain uninteresting for most of the playthrough. It would be like watching an E3 event and they don't do anything horrendously cringe and you're just waiting for them to fuck up in some way and they don't, which is, I think, why at least 70% of the people watching it are watching it.
You ever wonder what the bottom of an Avatar shoe looks like? Well, bam! There it is.
I'll never get to experience its multiplayer, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the main focus of development and what made it worth the purchase, with its single-player campaign existing as a supplement. Because that is the golden idea of Mystic Knights, the idea that I don't get to see. That's the novel thing that, were circumstances different, could have given it more recognition. If it was good, which it probably wasn't based on the rest of it. Hello?
Now you know what true suffering is, you fuck.
What, because of the game? I mean, it was fine. There's just better things I could be doing with my time, I guess.
Death to all who oppose me.
Also, I thought I made it clear that the deal was off. Like, we're not doing this bit anymore.
Say your prayers.
Are you threatening me?
Yes.
Don't threaten me when I'm in my dark arc. Or else you'll find out how truly dark and twisted my thoughts are. How disturbed. You think you've done anything as totally twisted and deranged as me?
I destroyed the federal government.
Oh shit. Well, that's kind of base. I haven't slept. I'm sweating. The video is over. Thank you for watching it. If you'd like to support the channel, you can subscribe to it. You can like it, or like the videos on it, and comment on them as well. You can also become a patron and join my Discord and follow me on Twitter. I also have some merch you can buy. I'm actually drinking coffee out of this new black mug that has the logo on it. It's not the best printing job in the world, I'll tell you that much, but it's a mug. I just make a doodle and then I ship the doodle off. Hope you enjoyed the video. I just want you to know I'm not like an angry video gamer, man. Sometimes there's a time and place to poke a little fun at a game. That's not all the time. We're allowed to like games around here. Hey, you know, but every once in a while there's a game that comes along where the likelihood that somebody who worked on it seeing this is so distant to me that I'm just like, fuck it. Anyway, thank you for watching the video, and an extra special thanks to Ailing Uncle, 2Password for Kids, Agendine, Alex Raymond, Alexander Smith, Andre Perkins, Aparts 89, Bayard Brown, Ben Carnell, Benjamin Sid Perez, D-Sky, Dalton, Danny, DKP Kilpatrick, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Deluminati, Diesel Dizzle, Dr. Beard, Dos Days, Edgy, Edward Avila, Fartmother, Game Master, Gaming with Clarptarp, Gamma, GM Jared, Goaty McGork, Gory Mundruff, I Fall Asleep to the Sound of Saturn, astral projecting inside the vortex, wandering in search of the machine, it must be sealed. I don't know what that is. Are those Tool lyrics? J. Alameen, Joseph Zanoni, Carrot, Kamikaze Melon, Leon Hooks, Lizatar, Lore, Marcus Chaney, Michael Schmidt, Morgan Harper, Nick Out the Brave, Octo, Oisto, Philip Woolley, Rahul Kirthi, Richard Gillespie, Roland, Salvatore Tosti, Semi! Snapplefish, This Deal is Getting Better All the Time, Turts, Zach Bishop, Crash Punk, Daniel Streb, Catherine Graven, Swoot Operator, A Hanging Chad, Bang Flang, Brady the Sanity Tax Collector, Brozoof Jones, Cantankerous, Dubs, High Food Court. I confidently told potential housemates that I paint orc goths if I were to talk about the Saddle Creek Sound. No go! Ishanji, Mad Monty 98, Morg D. Trius, Nafis Hook, Ophelia Fishwife, P. Dizzle, Persian Air, Please Stop Treating Player Agency as a Negative, Leaning Left-Right Manually isn't a fucking cover system, it's basic movement. Robert Brandon, Samuel Ward, Simon Daniel, Sugar Wolf, Technica, 10-Beat, That Uninformed Guy, The Brunette Girl from ABBA, Where Am I? Help, 410,757,864,530 Gay Cops, Agitated Aunt Anally Assaults Your, Alistair Stewart, Alexander Olbrich, Ali G, All the Nope, Andrew Light, Atari Steed, Auspicious Whiskers, Beetle Sky, Ben and Kara Dowling, Bishy93, Biv Dub, Brendan McFadden, Brett Weaver, Colby, Colt of Lita, Dan Cullen, David Fromke, David Harpstrite, Dazed Clockwork, Dongs.exe, Yulino7, Fix My Brain, Garrett Squared, General Klazara, Haley Bobella, Hitoshi-san, Jake Desi, Jake Raynor, Jimmy Changa, June Choi, Jordan Balzano, Joshua David, J-Raptor, Captain Ketchup, Leopold Gloom, M, Mandalore Gaming, Marauding Fraud, Max Cohen, MCR, Micah J. Best, Miles Phillips, More Sharks, Mr. Alpacaton, Mr. Ducky Quack, Mystical Lint, Name Requires DLC, Nick Hill, Nick Timmons, Nuclear Sun, Noel Rom, Oliver Marshall, Opichi Kostra, Paul Fierce, Robert, Ruibi Somem, Samejima, Scarthrax, Lord of the Roaches, Scofflaw D, Skylar J. Leal, Sob Akaduka, Startide, Swole B-Men, Team R, The Ratmonger of Castle Jork, Travis Houston, Vincent Cronin, Zenga PF, Zdienek Benez, 9 Hour Depression Nap, A Real Live Skeleton, Adam Page, Adrian, Al, Alec Dye, Alzam, Anarchy Parrot, Andre Ferreira, Andre Kalganov, Angel Jimenez, Anon, R-Attack, Arshist Knight, Justin Scott, Barbecue Jr., Beardicus, Ben White, Benjamin Judah Phelps, Big Cheese 1000, Big Honk, Binary Vision, Bindle, Biddles 9999999, Blotherus, Bloodclap Mentality, Boris Rombold, Brams, Brendan Naftal, Buckaroo, Byron Callan, Cabbage, Calavera, Callum May, Cannon Go Boom, Cat Hands, Chowhorde, Charles Morgan, Chicken Legs, Chimichanga Jones, Chris Jordan, Chris Tallarico, Christopher Robbins, Chunky Duncan, Clay Catlin Loves You, Colin Boyd, Commissar, Connor Sullivan, Crispy, Delaminek, Dan Richardson, Dante de Glanville, Dark Cloud 402, Darkov, David Quinn, David Offer, David Sander, Declan J. Keen, Der Commissar, Devin Rampersad, Devlin Gillespie, Dilda, DJ Necroman, Dreadhead, Dren, Drenched, Dry County Blues, Edward Crawford, El Jaguar, Elizabeth Haste, Ursandro, Ixidium JTR, Fazy, Fib Likely, Frodo Ballbag, Frederick, gay actor Michael Douglas, Gecko Jones, Ginevra, George, Greg Buchold, Greg McKee, Gray for Life, Grimby's my big baby boy, Halcyon-ized Platypus, Euronymous Goa, Hugo, Hunter McHenry, Ian Greer, Ian Laser, INTJ loves her INTP, Evo Zap, Jay Marshall, Jake Steele, Jared Siri, JDog3433, Jean-Philippe Malouin, Jessica, Jesse Randall, Jim J, J-Man DX, Joe Face, Jojo Evans, Jordan, Wabuktis, Justin Stewart, Khalil Corey, Kevin O, Knife Dampier, Chris Odie, KS, Lori Kubri, Lazarna Chekhov, League of Struggle, Leland Miliokis, Leon Holmes, Lewis Gordon, LGX, LL0X, Lorelei, Lost Via Domus, Lucas Kettner, Major Millions, Mangy Mongrel, Matt F, Maximo7 Labar, Megan Carmody, Michael Pelican, Mikhail DeClerc, Midget Heavy, Mike Garza, Mocha, Mr. Sark, Mr. Bojangles, Mundane, Q-Chan, Nicholas Nelson, Nobody, Noel M. Nothing beats the taste sensation when maple syrup collides with putty. Nuan Sonar, Nutty Jawa, Oh Heck It's Noah, Olympus 3DX, Omar Iid, Otter Soldier, Patrick Bloom, Pen Knight 89, Petrus Montanu, Fat Murdoch, Pikati, Pizarro, Please Keep Making Videos, Professor Nowitz, Ronan, Rinkara, Robert Jernovsky, Sagasachis, Sam Gardner, Savvy Fav, Scos117, Scott Aldridge, Sean Clausen, Shadowman 13, Seagent, Sleepy Poss, Spaceman Spiff, Spider, Splort Dusky, 7th of his name, Spooky, Stanislavish, Steinuel, Stefan Andel, Steve, Strakinia Radenkovic, Subdermal Cassette Loader, Sidney Steverson, Terranism, that one scene of Mulder playing with the pencils. It's a good one. The Deharan, The Fit Hit the Shan, The Masked Slacker, Thomas Hassel, Tindalos, Titan, Toaster Ringtail, Totally Not a Mimic, Trenton Wilkins, Turbo Bra, Vel, Waba, Ween Supreme, Wildo, Yak Spiker, Eves Yang, Zachariah I Am, Zin, Zubertuber, AJ Leroy, A.L. Carpenter, A Bonkers Chicken, Adolency, Adrian Facci, Adventure Game Geek, Alexei German, Alex Griffin, Alex Hanna, Alexis Pinsonalt, Andy Starling, Andrei Kernkov, Andy Bowman, Anno, Anthony Daniel, Aractuary, Eris Alessandrakis, Austin Mathis, Autotroph, Baker, Bent Out of Shape, Big Hubert, Bo, Boop Butt, Brad Bones, Brandon Corker, Brian Sanson, Brick Dick Rick, BS Fam, B Salpy, Captain Swing, Cat Boots, Kaz, Christian Danny Storgard, Christopher White Schneider, Clayton, CMG 161, Corrine Green, Creepy Lounge Lizard, Krylar, Dale Walden, David Moreau, David Sterling, Dizzy Rogue, Doug Robinson, Dylan Clements, Dinah, Urf Go Hard, Edward Samuel, Ellerick, Evan Jones, Fabulous Freckles, Foxel, Fears, Feeder Goldfish, Fishbulb, Frank, Freaking Bamboozler, Game is Good, Gamer Cot, Games Brit, Gargantua, Gato Malo, George Costanza, Grimbeard Stole My Credit Card, Gerlin, Gusinder, Half Asian Viking, Harry Sykes, Hashi Singh, Helen, Hinchis, Homeboy Dirtbag, We Lay, I Do Pee, but not freely, for no man is truly free, Ian Weiserman, Ignazio de Guglielmi, Infidel Sawyer, IP68, Isabella Stoner, Jacob Hanley, Jake Roper, James Sutherland, Jared, Jayak, Jeep Pete, Jesse Karczynski, Joe Reynolds, Joe Richardson, Johan Kvan, Jonathan Becker, Josh B, Joshua McLarnon, Yoni Niamela, Yuha Kauri, Kakun, Karen Mayville, Katie, Kenopsia, Kevin Thurber, Krampik Newt. Let's say hypothetically that a dog did learn how to use a computer. There is nothing illegal about that. Laszlo, Lucas, Lucian Jelly, Ludwig, Level Zero, Marshall H, Matthias Waltman, Max Karlaftis, Melly, Mike Amarillo, Meepy Fay, Mr. Mundus, Mop, Mugwuffin, Yargar, Niall McCorkindale, Nicholas Monroe, None, Not a Door Person, OK Cat Dad, Ombud, Ottavio Albanesi, Party Over Here, PWs, Pedro Costum, Peter Muehlfellner, Phony Soprano, Piotr Stankowski, Princess Celestia, Princess Flumph, Professor Nex, Pixelfish, Replicant, Rana Banana, Resurrection, Ricky Goss, Ricky Rigatoni, Righteous Malady, Rith, Roast Samson, Robert Scotland, Ryan Hollinger, Ryan McLeod, Sam C, Sam Myers, Samage, Sappho, Sarah, Saturn999, Espargo Vox 33, Schluff, Schwabalaba, Sean Lees, Sean McDonald, Seaway Jerk, Sentient Turtle, Sean Rogers, Sean Tiva, Silvano Gonzalez, Sinan de Montoya, Slava Saknienko, Slavic Dreams, Smokey, Solarbox, Stephen LaFlame, Super Dunman, Sven Grell, Sweet Pete the Blue Moon Hero, Psynoise, Syruprise, Tatami Guy, Tax Deductible, Test Done, The Gaming Beehive, Little B, The Real Kal-El, The Ultimate Fat Ass, This is a certified hood classic. Thread, Tim Johnson, V, Val Halverson, Valinora, Varioth, Ventim, Vinculus, Visitor Information, Warhopper, Whiskey Grenade, Your Patron, Yuko Valis, Zachary Schroeder, Zero Kind, ZJ, One Iserlow, A. Hyamley, Acid Buffet, Adam Lindsay, Adrian, Alberto Ferreira Valverde, Alex Armybull, Alex Spears, Alex Yui, Allegory, Alpaca Omega, Feeder of Blood, Anna Trans Rights Exo, Anders Evanrud, Andrew Hagstrom, Andy F, Anonuff, Ansi Poikonen, Astro Shepherd, as Roy, Baba Booey, Bertigan, Basti, Ben E, Bernard Walker, Bertie Bertig, Bertie, Big farty nuts. Big Death Energy, Big Danger, Big Stupid Grin, Bloodworth, Bleach Demon, Bobby Campbell, Bobson Jr., Boy, Bow to the Beard, Brand Faust, Brandon Harris, Brandon Shock, Bratishka, I Brought You Something to Eat, Cam, Camelopardis, Campbell Gilpin, Cassidy Moser, Chalabard, Chaz Holy Holies, Chef Toker, Chili Dish Gambino, Chonko Ronco, Chris Barb, Crispy Bacon, Christy Mallory, Chunkus Manhunkus, Clinton Attaway, Cloister 56, Colton Rowe, Conrad Eastman, Cryptid John, Dalton Goes Fast, Dan Zinski, Dandy Alexander, Danny D, Daniel F, Daniel Gen, Daniel Newberry, Daniel Pena, Dantec K3, Daryl Lay, David Bojack, David Badzinski, David LaSalle, David Musiel, Dead Alewives, Delta, Damar, Display Name Here, Div, Deveath Faust, Domingo Carlo Martinez, Dr. Tiddlybits, Drunken Badger, Dustsucker, Dylan Lash, Edmo Philo, Edward Wheeler, Eggs McOmelet, Emmett Arthur, Epic Dude 467, Eric Leong, Eric Lon, Erotic Fridge Magnet Poetry, Estix, Figley Berserker, Fitzgerald 93, Florian Vogel, Francisca Demitrovska, Freaky Demon, Fremantle, one word, Franz, G. Brading, G's, Genuine Chillcast, Gianni Matrograno, Gideon Joubert, Graf Zal, Greyheart, Gribbly, Guy, H.L. Longgirl, Hannes Jacoby, Hazel Connor, Hello, Holy Mullet, Hairneck Berzuka, Hushfox, I Fall Down, Ian Baranek, I Guess It's Time, Impulse 101, Inside My Strange Place, Jack Anderson, Jacob Gardner, Jade Partida, James Burton, JB, JCL 300, Jean-Philippe Simard, Jick Magger, Joe Man, John Adams, John Arajo, John Brumley, John Camich, John Stone, Jory Avner, Joseph Paulos, Josh Hessler, Joshua Charlton, Joshua Kahn, Joshua Stewart, Jove Wardlaw, Justavian, Justinus Martinez, Khalifas, Karate Schnitzel, Carpad, Casey Gould, Keenan Smith, Kiki Dharma, Kimia, Kit Tonkin, Kirano, Kyle Hooten, Kyle Williams, LaFazar, Laura Harwood, Lauren Miller, Lee Stone, Leonardo Antonio Aquasanta, Louis Quinn Whalen, Low C, Love You More, Lucas Mendel, Luke Gazaway, Lux Umbra, Lynn Lovett, Mad Morgo, Madzy, Magnodick, Manu Weidman, Mara Elena, Matt Clark, Matt Dumont, Matt M, Matt Chester, Matthew Arrowwood, Maxime Sleepwalker, Mage Win, Murr, Metal Crew, Mia, Michael B, Michael Henderson, Michael Maines, Miguel Imaro, Mikey Tambourine, Mohammed Ali, Mojave Jade, Moral, Mungo Jerry, Mustard Sweat, Nathaniel Dolenchuk, Negative Creep, Nick Bowl, Nick Johnson, No Tabby, Octo, Oliver Darmody, Uncle, Orienmeister, Orlando Murillo, Pagan Butler, Parapug's #1 fan, Peach, Peachy Pixel 8, Pentagon Black, Phoenix Flames, Frand, Pinky, Piotr Skubawa, Piranot, Pommy, Popeyed Bark, Prodmage, Pugs Please, Quirky Top Hat, Rachel Rose, Raphael Becker, Rasmus Karras, Raul Vidal, R Damn Dude, Red OKB, Reflect, Rayo Palmiste, Riley Pelling, Ruben, Rex Ivan, Robert McMahon, Roosevelt Hoover IV, Ross McKinnon, Rotten Avocado, Ryan Garvey, Ryan Malone, Sabbones, Saint, Sam, Samantha Wells, Sammy 3D, Samuel Albert Mell, Sarah Denman, Scott Valine, Sealever, Sean Bradford, Cesium, Seth Flagg, Shazbot 101, Shempimite, Simply Cypher, Snaggy Duck, Sneezing Through Your Butt Leads to Grave Consequences, Sokadeth, Someone Finally Pays Me, Space Lizard, Sparkle, Stowe 2020, Stop Doing This Segment, Summerstorm, Sweeneasy, Sinulia, System 16, Team Zack Attack, That One Guy, That Taffer, The French Ghosty, The Magnificent Spud, This is Sarah Gamble and I'm Shutting You Down, This Sid 4, Thomas Caldickery, Thomas Finnegan, Thy Rourke, Timothy, Tony Brandt, Tony Gleed, Tristan Daniels, Saurus, Tucker White, Tyler Mindrup, Unpolished Mirror, VK, Valiant Shadow, Van the Cheesin, Vincent Liu, Vlad M, Vucrules, Wendigo, A Fear Worth Living, Webgoth, Widowkind, Wilhelm Schroederheim, William Riker, Witch Knight Wren, Walrek, Zan, Extreme Steve, Yassarian, Yuki Cyan, Zane Break, and and Oscar Arnarsson for being a patron. I'll really quickly wrap up. I am eternally grateful for your support, and without you there would be no channel. I would be dead. I would be in a ditch. There would be a child poking me with a stick. I hope you're doing alright. Hope you're staying safe. Hope you're staying goth. Hope you're staying gaming. I'll see you in the Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. I'll see you in the next video. I'm gonna get working on that right now. Okay, see you later. Bye.